Due to a combination of graduating college and being stuck inside due to a global pandemic, I had a lot more time to play games over the past year than I've had in a while. This meant I wasn't just playing new games from 2020, but also stuff I missed over the past half-decade. The 10 games on this list, which were released at various times over the past several years, really helped me keep things together in 2020. For one, because escapist entertainment is often helpful on some level, but also because I really enjoy analyzing the way games' design and story are crafted, and what makes each of them work or not work. So this is both my list of recommendations of games I think people will find enjoyable, as well as my analyses of those games for use by people that take my recommendations, people that already played them, or just folks that like to watch YouTube videos. Hope you enjoy it. Oh, and the game on screen is called Future Grind. I didn't know what footage to use for the intro, and it's a fun game, so we'll just say it's number 11. Number 10 is the soft reboot of God of War from 2018. This whole game takes place within one tracking shot, kind of like Birdman or that one scene from Charlie Work. There's no loading screens when fast traveling or any cutscenes with two-shot over-the-shoulder conversations. It's just all that one uninterrupted tracking shot. Keeping the camera close and focused on the game's protagonists had so many benefits for both its story and its gameplay. God of War features a lot of large fantasy creatures, and their true size and the awe they might inspire is conveyed so much better when they spill out of the frame the same way they might not fit within the character's field of vision. I never played the original God of War trilogy, but I went back and watched some videos, and I find it interesting how much farther back the camera is pulled, and the effect it has on making Kratos seem so much more powerful and make his enemies seem so much less daunting. From what I gather, this made a lot more sense for what those games were going for, but I really like how when this game wanted to show a much more vulnerable protagonist, it really zoomed in and gave you the feeling of being a small speck of dust next to a much larger universe, which is a huge strength for the story it's trying to tell, which is not as much about gods or mythical creatures as it is just about an aging man trying to build an emotionally healthy relationship with his son. As far as gameplay is concerned, this uninterrupted tracking shot I think also increased pressure to make sure that any sort of side activities felt really fluid with the main story of the campaign. God of War is an open world game with a lot of optional areas to explore. The problem here is that if any area feels unnecessary, underdeveloped, or just too separated from the main game, it'll totally ruin the rhythm that the tracking shot has been building up for all this time. I'm not going to say God of War is universally successful in avoiding having filler. There's still a map full of more icons than you ever need to worry about. But I can tell a lot of effort went into making level design for even these side areas interesting and varied. Also, huge shout out to the puzzles in this game. They strike this perfect balance of being so easy, but being designed in such a way that I feel so smart for solving them. So thank you to the designers of this game. Now that I've given this game its due credit, I'm going to quibble a little bit and explain why it's number 10. The most fun I had with this game was at the beginning of it when I was still learning how to deal with all the individual enemies and trying to find tactics to deal with them. Unfortunately, almost every enemy in the game gets introduced by about the halfway point, with the exception of some elemental variations and some bosses. This is a real shame because not only does it detract from gameplay variety, but it also stops some areas from having as much unique character as they could have. The art direction in this game is fantastic and gives different environments a really different feel. I would love if this was also complemented by giving each individual area its own unique enemies that made gameplay feel different. But unfortunately, outside of one fantastic area, this doesn't really happen. Also, despite having really good dialogue and being so well acted, the story itself is pretty simple and not something I'm blown away by. This is more than something I feel like I can parse out in this video, but my impression of it is as a very okay story elevated by its execution. I really had a good time playing this game, but I can't say I loved it. If you're not someone who loves open world games, or not someone who's super interested in parental relationships in games, if you haven't felt motivated to play God of War yet, you probably don't ever need to. It's fine. I happen to enjoy both those things, and I had a good time, but it's like a 25 or 30 hour long game. There are other things to do in life. We're gonna get a vaccine soon. You can see your friends. It's okay. You can leave this one video game aside. Number 9 is Titanfall II, specifically its single-player campaign. It's the best thing the original creators of Call of Duty have made since Modern Warfare. Okay, I realize I actually need to clarify at this point. Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare. And it made me think about why that game was so good. The parts I hear talked about most from COD 4 are the sniper level, the drone level, and the nuke. These were all great because they drastically altered how the player interacted with the game. All Gillied Up promoted caution by giving the player the ability to blend into tall grass. Death from Above made the player spam destruction from the safety of the air. And Shock and Awe negated player agency altogether, forcing them to stand there as their body deteriorated from radiation. Early Call of Duties understood that this variety and not action set pieces were their real strength, and so does Titanfall 2. Sure, the game is pretty with plenty of flashy moments, but its real strength is the fact that each successive area introduces new ways for the player to engage with the experience. Titanfall 2 was already set up for success in this regard by being able to transition between shooting, parkour, and mech combat, but it also continuously finds new ways to shake up each of these mechanics in unique levels deserving of mention alongside any of early COD's best. I'm not going into specifics because I really valued being able to go into this game knowing almost nothing that was going to happen. If you're someone that likes single-player first-person shooters, I'd really recommend checking this out. Even though the campaign is only 5 hours long, it's pretty easy to find this for like $10 and it's well worth it for that price. I've also even heard there's multiplayer. Number 8 is Night in the Woods. Night in the Woods tells the story of a young woman named May who drops out of college midway through her sophomore year to return to her small Appalachian hometown. This game reminded me of my own experiences returning home for breaks from school. The way it portrays awkward morning conversations with parents you haven't lived with in a while, how it shows a town becoming something you don't as much recognize as businesses you grew up with close, and the difficulties of reconnecting with friends as their lives have been going on while you've been away. The portrayal of these experiences and the writing that brings them to life is strong enough that this could have just been a successful cartoon rather than a game, but I'm glad that it's a game because of the way it utilizes player choice. Night in the Woods shares a lot of similarities with Telltale's The Walking Dead and all the other Telltale games that came after, in that it depends less on developing quick reflexes and more upon making decisions inside of conversations. One of the problems I had with Telltale games, though, was that they often really needed your decisions to feel important because you'd be in the zombie apocalypse or investigating a murder, when they often didn't change the story that much. A well-explored problem with choose-your-own-adventure games is that when you give players a binary choice with large consequences, it means you might need to make twice as much content. So what a lot of games do is when you have a choice between saving two characters, it means whoever you save is going to die like a couple hours later, or potentially the two characters pretty much just serve the same role within the plot. This is very bad if you're trying to give the player a sense that they're making life or death decisions, but it's not that bad if you're just showing them dicking around their hometown. May doesn't make universe-altering decisions, she's just deciding what friend to hang out with or whether or not to eat tacos before she goes to a party. Things that, like a lot of decisions you make at that age, might affect you in a single moment but aren't going to have long-lasting repercussions. It's just what you do in a day. But just because every bit of optional content doesn't build towards some huge finale doesn't mean that they're not beautiful, impactful, and relevant to the story each in their own way. And that speaks so well to what I experienced in my late teens and early 20s, coming to terms with how small myself and my decisions were in the grand scale of the universe and history and even the city I lived in, but yet still how my actions and the actions of those around me were everything to me and those people. Night in the Woods is a beautiful game about finding your place in the universe, and I highly recommend it even though no one's ever going to call it the Dark Souls of anything. Number 7 is The Last of Us Part 2. It's great. I recommend it. I'm not going to say anything more because I've spent over an hour talking about it already. I hope that puts things in perspective, though. My channel's almost a Last of Us Part 2 fan page, and the next 6 games are all games that I liked even more than that, so let's move on. Number 6 is the BAFTA award-winning Outer Wilds. Outer Wilds takes place in a solar system stuck in a 22-minute time loop. Every area and planet is explorable almost from the start. The game doesn't instill awe in the player by showing them a larger and larger world that they're able to explore, but by giving them a deeper understanding of a world they've already flown through 100 times. Each planet in the game is a large series of puzzles, some of which won't be obvious how to solve until you've found something on an entirely different planet. So you'll revisit the same planets several times before you're able to find everything that's there. This game has the best aha moments because a lot of the things you're figuring out to do are like how to get into a building that you haven't been able to figure out how to get into as you've been looking at it the whole game. But it never gets frustrating because you get stuck at a puzzle in one place, you can go explore a different planet and there'll probably be something there that can help you with future puzzles. And since the main gameplay is always unique puzzles, it's hard to get bored. Unlike God of War, areas aren't primarily differentiated by just how different they look, which granted they do and the game has great art direction. Its planets are most strongly differentiated by how they force the player to interact with the game differently. Like Titanfall 2, it's a game that understands that what's powerful isn't just all the pretty colors that you have, but it's about actually giving the player a variety of things to do. These intricate tasks make this relatively small game by today's standards feel so rewarding to explore. You're running into the same challenges it feels like an astronaut might be running into exploring these planets. I realize that my case would be strengthened a lot by an example, but one of the weaknesses of this game is that it's pretty hard to replay once you know how everything works, and I wouldn't even really want to spoil one puzzle for people watching this, so I would just recommend that if anything I've said here sounds exciting, definitely go check it out. Number 5 is Return of the Oprah Den, which I always have an urge to call Revenge of the Oprah Den for some reason. As far as I know, this is the best game where you play an insurance agent. In the early 19th century, the East India Company tasks you with investigating the Oprah Den, a ship that drifted into a British harbor after being unaccounted for 4 years with most of its 60-person crew presumed dead. The game is all one large puzzle where you're trying to figure out the cause of death or disappearance of each of the crew members, and if applicable, who killed them. Your method of investigation is what makes this game so great. You have this skull watch thing that lets you walk up to a dead body and see the instant that that person died. Now this would be incredibly easy, but the game doesn't tell you what the name of every character you're seeing is. You're only given a crew manifest with the names of everyone on board and then have to use contextual information from the flashbacks to match those names with people in them. To properly identify everyone in the game, you need to pay attention to all the detail on screen. It feels so good every time you catch a new detail and get to scratch another name off your list. But it also has the added effect of making this game about death focused on the lives taking place around it. Maybe for the first 10 or 15 seconds of every flashback, you're focused on the deceased. But after that, you wander around and see what else was going on around them, who was interacting with who, and what these people acted like before their lives were cut short. There's this effect with the upbeat tone of most of the game's soundtrack that almost makes it feel like when you travel back in time, you're bringing these people back to life. There's definitely a potential takeaway from this game about human fragility and how close to death we all could potentially be, but there's also the flip side of that, of how beautiful it is to each all be our own unique selves and how lucky we are to be alive in this time and stuck inside during a global pandemic. Number 4 is my favorite game that actually came out in 2020. Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War. The only game with the pure, unadulterated American courage to rehabilitate a cartoonishly racist president, famous for completely bungling a viral outbreak movement back half a century.
Funding death squads in Guatemala.
Funding death squads in El Salvador.
Funding death squads in Nicaragua by selling weapons to our supposed enemies, Iran.
And this game is also progressive because it surpasses the absurdly low bar in acknowledging that non-binary people exist. 2020 was the year that we all needed to be reminded of America's superiority to the rest of the world and how we get to enjoy a little war crimes as a treat.
You know who we are? Every mission we go on is illegal.
I'm kidding, obviously. Number 4 is Hades. Hades is an isometric hack-and-slash game by a company I've been told is very good and made a bunch of games I've never gotten around to playing. You play as Zagreus, the son of Hades, as he tries to repeatedly break out of the underworld. Along the way, other Greek gods will offer Zagreus a choice of power-ups, allowing the player to craft their own unique build. Though, should the player die, these will all go away and you're sent right back down the river Styx to the beginning of the game. But the story remembers that you died here, and each time you go through this is unique. There's one character that will always make fun of you for the way you died, and your father will be sitting there taunting you for failing yet again. This actually reminds me of one of my favorite parts of a lot of BioWare games where you have these times between missions to just chat with other characters. Except for here, instead of success being the thing that rewards you with more story, it's actually death and failure. This means that the story is always moving forward, though. In a game like The Last of Us Part 2, when you die, it just rewinds you the few minutes back to the beginning of the encounter that killed you. The downside of this is that if an encounter is really hard and you die like like a dozen times for the entire time you're stuck on that encounter. You're not moving the story at all. Even though Hades sends you all the way back to the beginning of the game if you die, there is never a point in this game where you aren't progressing the story. Each death is canon, and each death allows you to develop relationships with characters and learn more about the world. And luckily, it's a world you're going to want to learn about, because the writing here is incredibly sharp and involving. The game's writers don't take themselves too seriously and made it a point to turn almost every unique mechanic of gameplay into a joke. So when characters are making fun of the situation that Zagreus is in, it's fun because they're making fun of the situation that you're in too. There's also enough unique dialogue that even after dying 100 times, I have friends who are still finding new dialogue they've never heard before. And beyond just being clever and plentiful, it's also emotionally resonant. The fact that a game about the Greek afterlife involves trying to complete the same task over and over again is very fitting. Because when you change the reality of either Zagreus' life or any of the entities around him, it really feels like a battle against the fates, because the whole game is getting you used to having the same struggle be an inevitability of the world. The combat doesn't get boring either, because each run you can choose a different set of upgrades from the gods. One run you might have an attack that shoots lightning and a dash that leaves behind poisonous clouds of wine, and then the next you'll have a totally different set of things. These upgrades, as well as a lot of the specifics of the environments, are randomized, so there's always a dash to the unexpected. Okay, so I've been dancing around it. The proper thing to refer to this as is a roguelike, but when I first heard the game described as such, it killed my interest in it. But I'm really glad I wound up checking it out eventually, and if you're someone like me who doesn't really love roguelikes, I'd still recommend you do the same. Hades spent almost 2 years in early access making sure all the kinks were worked out and the game was consistently fun to play. By all indications, it also seems like Supergiant Games gave their team the time it needed to complete the game without working themselves half to death, which is really comforting to hear given some recent gaming news. I think Hades is entirely deserving of the praise it's received this year. I recommend checking it out, knowing that even if you're in the minority of people that don't enjoy it that much, you'll at least be supporting one of the better names in the video game industry right now. Number 3 is Hollow Knight. Hollow Knight is a 2D side-scrolling action game where you're a bug exploring an old abandoned kingdom. It's cute, it's funny, and sometimes it's hauntingly beautiful. Here's the thing that I found aggravating about myself. I feel incredibly compelled to search a game for all the loot and Easter eggs that I can find, but I also really hate spending more than like 30 seconds trying to spec my character, which means I spend a lot of time trying to track things down in games that I'm never going to bother figuring out how to use. So I really appreciated that every item I found in Hollow Knight was useful to me. Things to discover are either upgrades to health, mana, or damage, new abilities that allow you to access more areas of the game world, or charms that you can swap out to change how your character functions. Only the third of those is really customizable, and you're never locked into charm choices, so I experimented with each of them at some point. Hollow Knight isn't number 1 on this list, but it is my favorite game I've ever played in terms of character upgrades. And I think this is the third time I'm bringing this up in this video, but when I made the point about God of War not having enough unique enemies, this was the game I was thinking of as a counterpoint. Not only do different areas in Hollow Knight require different kinds of platforming skills from the player, but they each also require different tactics to deal with new enemies. By the way, if anyone's figured out a good way to fight these dudes that shoot like 3 different projectiles at once, please let me know. I could also go on about how the combat strikes a perfect balance between challenges and rewards, how satisfying it feels to revisit old areas and discover new secrets, and how the storytelling hints at a larger universe while only showing you small pieces of it. Hollow Knight definitely deserves these compliments, but I'm doubtful of whether it would exist in its current form without. Number 2, which is the Soulsborne series. Or rather, Bloodborne and the Dark Souls trilogy. I haven't beaten Sekiro and I don't have a PS3 or 5 to play Demon Souls. Yup, I hadn't played any of these games until this year. It's also hard for me to figure out what to say about them, both because they've been the topic of so much discourse already, and I feel like the good things I'd say are already good things I've been saying about all the games before this. They're each a masterclass in combining great art direction with unique enemies and gameplay challenges that makes for some of the most memorable areas in all of gaming history. I mean, I think God of War wound up so low on this list because the Souls series spoiled me for how good world design and combat can be, which probably wasn't fair to it. I had avoided these games both because I didn't really have time and because I didn't think difficult games were for me. But when the pandemic gave me time and a housemate lent me Bloodborne, I started to feel why these were so fun. It's actually kind of like Return of the Oprah Den, where when every detail is relevant, you get more immersed in the world. In that game, it might be the pattern on someone's shoes, and in Bloodborne or Dark Souls, it's the way in which every individual enemy moves. Even the smallest enemies in these games can take you down or seriously wound you if you don't understand their attack timing. Case in point, I recorded this footage after not playing the game for like 6 months and got completely destroyed by these little guys. As grim as these games are, I was really thankful to have something this absorbing at the beginning of the pandemic. Also, because these games are like crazy popular, I feel comfortable spoiling just 2 little details from Bloodborne and Dark Souls 3. If you really want to skip it, you can go to this time code. In Bloodborne, when you get to Old Yarnum, there's this guy named Jara who yells at you from the top of a tower. If you don't turn back when he tells you to, he starts opening fire with a Gatling gun. You have to fight through the whole area to get to him as he's raining down bullets on top of you, and then when you reach him on top of the tower, he's one of the hardest fights in the game. I'm sorry you don't have any footage of me fighting with him. I thought better of it after what those little mangy boys did to me. Then in Dark Souls 3, which came out a year after Bloodborne, in the Undead Settlement area, there's an unseen enemy that's hurling spears across the map from his own tower. So after dodging the spears and finally making your way up the tower, it seems like you're up for another Jura-type fight. But it's just this giant who's just like, nah man, I'm chilling, I'll be friends with you. And he stops throwing spears at you and just throws them at your enemies now. I really loved how this played on my expectations from the last game to make me feel relieved, but it gets even better. There's a later area in the game with all these enemies that are crawling with maggots that infect you with them every time they hit you, and then you just start hemorrhaging health as they're dancing all over you. This section was beating my ass and I was hating these guys. Then I got to the top part of this area and noticed spears sticking out of the ground everywhere. Sure enough, my giant friend was hurling them from the other side of the map to save the day. And yeah, this made me appreciate the thought that went into making the world design geographically make sense. But more importantly, I cared more about this giant with like 2 lines in that moment than I ever did about Atreus in God of War. If you're noticing that spears aren't falling from the sky, it seems that something in my playthrough made him die from natural causes. Now I'm sad. That just happens to be one of my favorite moments in the series, but there's plenty of stuff like that throughout. I'm really glad I took the time to play the Soulsborne games, but there is one game I liked even more, and it was actually what opened me up to playing difficult games like the Souls series in the first place. Number 1 is Pathologic II. Pathologic II is kind of a sequel and kind of a remake of a brilliant but rather broken Russian game from the mid-2000s. While there are references to the first game, it's entirely possible, and in fact I would recommend doing so, to play Pathologic II without playing Pathologic 1. In Pathologic II you play Artemy Burak, a medical student returning to his small town in the Russian steppe from a much larger city. Soon after arriving, a mysterious illness starts killing off increasingly large numbers of townspeople, and Artemy becomes one of only a few doctors trying to stop the plague. But what does it actually play like? Most of the game is spent going between point A and point B having conversations with people. Now this is cool enough by itself. There are interesting political struggles within the town where the response to the plague becomes very much dependent on how it would benefit certain elites. Yeah, it was really weird to play this game in late March. The town also has multiple cultural groups that aren't really explained to you. People will say things that don't make sense to you until you've gained enough details about the town, and the game doesn't hold your hand. Again, actually forcing you to do the work is a great way to build immersion. Also, most of the central characters are children you're tasked with protecting, each of whom is unique and adorable and someone you generally care about and want to see survive all this. So even if this was just what people sometimes derogatively call a walking simulator, it would still be really interesting to walk around this world and interact with these characters. But it's not just that. Pathologic II is an incredibly punishing survival game. So first, of course, you gotta worry about health. The world has gone to shit and there are people who are robbing folks. They want your stuff and they're willing to take it off your cold, dead corpse. And fighting them is hard. Getting punched will spin you around to a new angle, and if you manage to face them again, melee weapons play like a random animation, so it's hard to predict whether you're even going to be able to hit them. And guns are rare, expensive, and jam incredibly frequently. These guys will drain your health fast, but they're not the only ones doing so. Remember, there's a plague about and you can catch it. If you don't wear enough clothes or take enough pills to keep a high immunity, you get sick and start draining health over time. The same thing happens if your hunger bar fills all the way up, which you have to constantly eat food to avoid from happening. And food too has become rare and expensive. Also, you need to sleep with a decent amount of regularity, otherwise that will start draining your health as well. But sleeping takes time, which can raise both your hunger and the effect you're feeling from sickness, so it's possible to die while sleeping in this game as your health bar dwindles to 0. So a lot of energy in this game goes into getting resources to make sure you don't starve to death, die of sleep deprivation, or get killed by the plague. You can start to steal things, but that'll piss everyone off in the region and cops will start to hunt you down and kill you themselves. And the great big cherry on top is that time is limited. This isn't Skyrim or The Witcher where you have all the time in the world to complete all the quests. There are 12 in-game days, and when you're not in a conversation, time is advancing by 1 in-game hour every 4 real-life minutes. Time spent getting bread or sleeping is time that can't be spent doing real story quests, that do expire with real consequences. It is every bit as much of a nightmare as it sounds, but it is 100% worth it. Remember, this game is exploring the life of someone trying to keep people alive under impossible circumstances. For this, the low lows are necessary. Plenty of games give you the option to either do a good or evil thing, but I've never seen one make it so hard to do a good thing as this. Choices in Pathologic II aren't choices between which one of 2 cutscenes you want to watch. It's a choice between having a good effect on the world of a game and potentially not having to worry about your hunger meter for the next half hour. And in a game where you can die in your sleep, you'll probably make the latter choice more than you'd like. On my first playthrough of this game, I let a character I really liked die because saving them just made the game too hard for me to get any further. But of course, there's the flip side to this. What it feels like to do something that aids your survival or maybe even helps more people. There's a whole barter system you can learn that makes it easier to keep yourself fed, and there are plenty of characters that will help you along the way. I talked about just one instance where Dark Souls made me feel deep appreciation for a fictional character, but Pathologic II is full of those moments, as it's also full of moments where you get to be the good guy and feel even better for it knowing what you had to overcome to get there.
The YouTuber Solmatol made an analysis video on Pathologic 2 where he said this thing that really spoke to me.
The game tells you, openly, that you will lose, that you cannot save everyone, that it's a fool's errand to even try. And then, with a wink and a smile, it tells you to be that fool.
Pathologic II uses its lowest of lows to lend so much meaning to all of its happy moments. I haven't even gotten into what it has to say about gaming itself. While so much of the current trend and discourse is to consider games movies plus player input, Pathologic II explores them as a play with a single audience member and actor who are one and the same.
You can think of all the hard things you have to do in this game as a sort of method acting, and there's even a director character who scolds you every time you die because your performance is lacking.
It's so cool, I can't recommend this game enough. All of its elements complement each other for a fluid experience. Its 12-day structure makes sure it doesn't overstay its welcome. It integrates player choice perfectly, explores the decisions of desperate people in a harsh world, uses gameplay to enhance its story, rewards the player for paying attention, makes every death seem meaningful. And it's so difficult, but my god is it worth it. Pathologic 2 isn't just my favorite game I've played over the last year, I'd say it's my favorite game ever.
I hope you enjoyed my list. I know this isn't a particularly big channel, but I love knowing that there are even just a few people that enjoy my videos. Life has been really busy since I finished The Last of Us videos, but it's started to calm down, so hopefully I'll have videos out more frequently now. In the meantime, I'd love to hear what games you enjoyed playing in this really weird year, or any thoughts you have on the games in this video. Thanks for watching. Happy New Year.